Welcome to the eGauge presentation of Launch a Successful Safety Committee. We're going to talk today with Alistair Paget, who is one of our certified safety professionals, and I'll let him tell you about himself in a minute. I'm Anna Hamilton, and I am one of the lead safety consultants for eGauge, and we're going to share our thoughts on how to lead a successful safety committee, get it up and running, and what you can expect in terms of results and how to get awesome outcomes. And we're excited that you're here. Alistair, you want to tell us a little bit about your background?
Okay, so as Anna said, I'm Alistair Paget, CSP, Certified Safety Professional, consultant with eGauge. Been in the safety business as a site safety manager, regional manager, etc., for about 2 decades. And in that time, obviously leading safety committees in various industries, a lot in logistics and warehousing operations.
That's great. Alistair brings so much experience to this topic. So, Alistair, I'm curious, what do you think the most important element of a successful safety committee is?
Okay, I'm going to be cute here and say that it be safe. But the pun is very much intended. It needs to be a safe space. It needs to be a space where people can speak up, and you feel comfortable and feel supported. Particularly, obviously, we're going to get into this, but it's very important that you have line employees being represented. And obviously, that can be a little intimidating, especially when you're first setting up your safety committees, and you're going to have to build that trust. But they have to feel safe speaking up, and sharing what they're seeing out on the floor.
I agree. I absolutely agree with you. I think my initial answer probably would to that question would be that we really want interaction and engagement, so we want everybody speaking up. So same kind of thing. It's really important to create that kind of environment.
And I think this is potentially the magic of a safety committee, because so many organizational issues are lack of communication. And if you can establish it in this vital setting, you can build on that for the rest of your organization.
So we're going to cover today the federal and state regulations that might impact your safety committee. We're going to talk about benefits of having a safety committee, how to build the business case for having a successful safety committee and launching a new one if perhaps you don't have one currently. We'll talk a little bit about the participants and who makes the best safety committee members, how to choose your team. We'll talk about structure and communication of that committee, and then how to actually launch the committee. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the federal and state regulations. OSHA doesn't actually require you to have a safety committee in most cases, but there are some regulations where you can be required. So usually OSHA will say under the general duty clause that you have to involve employees and you have to have a safe work environment. And one of the best ways to do that is to have a great safety program. The other piece that you need to look at is, are you in one of the 31 states that require a safety plan or a committee? Because you may have state regulations. For instance, Connecticut requires that you have a safety committee. So does the state of Washington. The state of Washington also requires that you hold elections to elect those safety committees. So make sure that you are checking out your state regulations or reaching out to us and we can help you find that out. But it is very important that you know whether or not you're required by your state to have a safety committee and how it needs to be set up and run.
While OSHA doesn't require for all employers that they have a safety committee, it's pretty universal if you're going to go into one of their OSHA supported protection programs, where they
The
recognize
VPP.
yeah, VPP, exactly. That almost always that's a required part of VPP.
And that would fall under our last topic, the high risk business. The chemical, I think there's some regulations under that kind of fall under general duty, but if you're in where you have to have the chemical program in place, the process safety improvement committees are a part of that as well. Okay, so Alistair, why don't you take us through the potential benefits?
One of the things is what you're going to get out of that safety committee is a lot of very raw data for what's actually happening. I mean, that's the whole idea of having the employees in the room, is that you're going to get a realistic idea of what's actually happening out on your floor. And obviously what that means is you have a potential to prevent things from going badly and prevent injuries before those injuries happen, because obviously one of the challenges a lot of times is we only find out that's or realize that something's going wrong once someone gets hurt. Safety culture, and I sort of in safety committee, safety culture is just huge. And I sort of mentioned that a little bit already, where using that committee and we're using that level of communication and we're using that trust to build out that safety culture. Obviously the key to safety culture is communicating when someone sees something going wrong or sees something that has a potential to go wrong, that they're communicating it. And obviously what we're going to do in the safety committee is we're going to model that behavior and then hopefully push that behavior out to our general population, if you will, to get that level of communication going, but also to provide routes of communication through maybe, if it doesn't need to be a manager, maybe it can be a safety committee member that you go to say, hey, I see something, and that safety committee member can raise it up to the leadership team in that way.
Oh, I think that's a great point because culture is huge, and you kind of have to walk the culture that you want as an organization in all aspects. So in safety and quality and leadership, it all has to tie together. And I think this next one's really interesting about problem solving within the safety committee, because I think that's where I really like working with safety committees, is when there's a problem and you're running the project to solve it. And that's what's really fun because you get to see the outcomes and the results. And I know you've had a lot of experience problem solving with safety committees and really elevating their status.
Yeah, I mean, we actually got to the point with a couple of safety committees where they were doing analysis using Ishikawa, the fishbone diagram, breaking down how an accident happened and actually using formal safety techniques, the safety committee members themselves, to break down how an incident happened and how to prevent that incident from reoccurring, which is pretty high level stuff. And that's also, just on the side note, that's one of the things. If you have safety committee members or you have people that have potential to become supervisors, safety committee is a great place to grow that skill set, because you can give them some specific skills. But if that problem solving in a safety committee is going to look a lot like problem solving for a production problem solving for a staffing issue, so it's a great place for maybe some of your younger employees or your employees that have a potential to become supervisors, etc., to start to gain those skills.
I agree. And I think that leads us right into knowledge sharing, because I think one of the most effective ways to kind of engage your safety committee is giving them the task of sharing with their department what's going on in the safety committee, what the topic of the month is. And that kind of helps develop those communication and public speaking skills, because they get to practice them within a group that, they're pretty comfortable with working with their coworkers. So it also gives an opportunity for their manager to see what those skill sets are to be able to give them additional assignments.
That's the managers. Actually, you're mentioning the managers again. Obviously, that's key to having the managers support for that safety committee member. My experience is sometimes the managers are a little bit cautious about this, about having too many chiefs and not enough Indians. In the end, I think the managers end up, because it helps them. It takes something off of their plate.
Yeah, and I think having the managers understand what you're trying to achieve with the safety committee and making sure you're communicating with both your management level and your leadership team what you're trying to solve, and then what your outcomes are and what your results are is huge, because that's where you get that buy-in from your manager's team to make sure their safety committee members are supported and what they need to do on the floor, but also supported in attending meetings. Because when things get busy, it's hard to let an employee leave for an hour. We're all focused on productivity and quality, and I think making sure that that communication is strong throughout really helps make that an important role within the organization.
Obviously, we're going to reduce injuries.
Right.
That's the easy way.
Yeah, and I think that's key when you're building your safety committee, that you're looking both at how do you reduce the risk, but how do you also improve the productivity? Because a lot of times they go hand in hand, and we don't always think about that. We kind of think a lot of people's experiences that safety slows down the process. But my experience is very different. I think that it smooths the process out. Smooth is fast, and fast is more productive. I think that there's a lot of gains that can be made, but again, you have to make sure that you're communicating and that you're taking into the business into account when you're looking at the risk. And sometimes you can't wrap everybody in bubble wrap to keep them safe, so to speak. So you have to look at good, better, best. But I think the safety committee can really impact cost a lot.
You're mentioning that the whole you can't wrap everybody in bubble wrap. I think this is an example of where you could have that conversation with a small group of employees that you have that trust and that safe conversation with, where it has to be absolutely safe, because and you start to get people to understand there's no such thing.
And you can't always get to zero risk. There's
Right.
always inherently some risk, but you want the risk that does the least amount of impact, both to the business, the brand, and the employee. So, what about employee engagement? How can a safety committee help with employee engagement? I'm sure there's some HR professionals and some leaders out there that are anxious to know that.
Wow. Where do you start? I mean, for one, once you have your committee established, the safety committee members recognized among their peers, another pressure relief valve, if you will, where there's a concern, maybe that leader in that department, the perception is that they're not communicating or they're not accepting those concerns. It gives another route for that concern to be raised to leadership. And also, as the safety committee becomes recognized, the safety committee becomes viewed as part of leadership. So the people's concerns are being acknowledged and evaluated in that safety committee. It gives a little bit of control back to that line employee over their existence and to make sure their work area is safe, which obviously, this is the basic, we go back to the hierarchy of needs stuff. Is it safe?
That's a great point. And, a safe work environment is one of the things that, prospective employees are going to look for. If you have a reputation of being a safe place to work, that's a benefit, versus you have a reputation of a lot of injuries. That's going to impact your recruiting ultimately, as well as being able to get top talent. I think the other thing is the safety committee can be fun. Training can be fun. You can infuse some events into it. You can, give prizes away. You can do some training. The sky's the limit in terms of how creative you can be with some of these safety events and some of the awareness events. And I think it just infuses a bit of positivity into the workday when you kind of have some of these safety events. And it can't all be fun and games, but it certainly can have an element of fun that kind of embeds that engagement of all the employees and how they can help the safety committee, how they can call out hazards. Some of the scavenger hunts. And I know I was reading an article the other day, and it was a privately owned company, and the owner's wife had ordered a couple of hundred rubber duckies, and she went on a shopping trip with her daughter, and they put 200 rubber duckies in this guy's business for the employees to just find. And then she gave out some prizes and stuff. But the whole point of her article was how much fun it was to watch the employees be like, where do all these ducks come from? Because some of them were really well hidden and some of them were really obvious, and they had just sort of been rubber duckied. So it was just kind of that fun, engaging everybody looking for the ducks. And
Building, getting them to look at their workspace and
exactly.
potentially recognize, where there were issues, where there was trouble, even if it's just where there's trash that needs to be cleared up.
Exactly, exactly. So if you're hunting through that, you find those things, and good conversation around it. And it's all about leadership. It can't just be the fun piece of it. If you communicate it well, it absolutely can impact employee engagement.
And actually, another thing on that, which is, we said about having another route to reporting a problem. The other thing is other safety committees that are not in the same department, your employees are going to be having lunch with them. They're going to be, so there's other opportunities. Again, if it, for some reason, your safety committee rep, you don't want to talk to them, there's another safety committee rep that you'll see at lunch that you can talk to them.
Absolutely. And I think too, just, having people out on the floor, it just makes you more aware of your surroundings. So you notice things.
And the safety committee members always, I mean, they own it. I mean,
Yeah.
they own it. They'll speak to it. It becomes their thing very rapidly.
Absolutely. So how do you get a safety committee if you don't have one? How do you build the business case? Because I think building solid business cases is one of the best skill sets that you can have.
The quicker way is for you to steal the arguments from the video. When you're in that meeting is to really, leverage, you've got to sell it. See articles all the time in the safety trades about you have to sell safety. Maybe we're not great salesmen, but you have to learn how to sell it. And part of it is these advantages and that developing your workforce, providing alternative routes to release pressure. You don't want them to be surprised by anything. You need to give them a heads up if something may be going wrong. Well, this is another way for them to get a heads up.
A problem statement out there to say, hey, we're seeing these injuries, and we think if we pull together a safety committee, it will give us training opportunity. It'll give us another set of eyes to pull data together. But I think you have to go armed with data. So you've got to define what your safety problem is for leadership so they understand what you're trying to accomplish. And then you have to really look at leadership and identify a champion. Who in your leadership organization is going to go to bat for you, and start to educate them to get them on board. And then identify your stakeholders. And a lot of times I think this is where building a business case can fail if you don't take into account all of the stakeholders. So you need to make partners with human resources. You need to make partners with the VP and the operations director so that they understand you're not taking time away from the floor and how it's going to benefit them. You need to be able to show them, potential productivity gains. Look at the process where the injuries are occurring and say, let's break this down and get those people to be supportive. And what's the one final thing that you've got to have when you start up your safety committee?
Budget.
Money. Absolutely. So you got to have a budget. You got to put together what your budget needs are, but you got to be able to show return on investment too. And you can look at a number of different things. You can look at your work comp premiums. You can look at your medical costs. You can look at downtime, recruiting costs. There's all kinds of things that you can pull into that. And if you need help with that, obviously we can help you with that. And that's for a longer class. But those are the things you kind of need to think about when you build your business case.
Yeah, when you're trying to identify stakeholders, because Anna mentioned downtime, and I think that's a huge blind spot in a lot of organizations. And one of the places, just growing up in the business around a lot of industrial engineers, there's a really good process argument. You've already heard us about, enhancing process, getting your safety committee members helping you identify defects in your process. If you can start to pull together an understanding of the effect of injuries on your process and your quality and start using that language, a lot of times your operational people, so your senior operational people, will get it and become big supporters.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So we've got our buy-in, we're ready to go. How do we pick our safety committee? So we got to pick a facilitator. We need somebody in that role who's good at facilitating teams. Doesn't necessarily have to like have a big safety background. I've seen really successful facilitators that learned as they go, but they were really good at organizing teams.
With a non-safety, you've got to make sure that they've got the support. They've got
Yes.
someone that they can go to, because again, having that safety, having that trust in that conversation, you've got to be able to say, if it's getting very technical or we're not really sure what the answer is, that they have a resource that they can go to and say, hey, can we table this conversation? Let me take that question to whomever and get their feedback.
And that works really well where you have a larger organization and maybe you have a safety manager, but they're not in every single building due to cost, or maybe you're a small business and you just can't afford a safety manager, but you can bring on a consultant group like eGauge, perhaps, and we can help support those people within there and ask, help with the technical programs. I have a couple clients that I've been working with that I'm working with their facilitators and they're doing great jobs, but we're providing, some of their training and programs for them that's out of their area of expertise. And even as a safety professional, when I owned safety committees, there were things out of my expertise that I had to bring in third parties to do training on, that just weren't like, you're trained in high angle rescue. That's not my ballywag. I've learned a lot about fall protection, but depending upon the level of fall protection training needed for the organization, I might bring a third party in for that. So there's lots of opportunities. I think picking the right department reps is also important. Making sure that you have a primary and an alternate, and that they're kind of the dedicated people, that you're not just sending a random person who's not busy, who's injured or whatever to the safety committee meeting that month, because you need some continuity for that communication piece to be successful in the department. And Alistair, I'm going to let you talk about the squeaky wheel employee, because I know that you have a passion for bringing them into the safety committee.
Completely by accident, I learned this lesson, and that is, if you have a manager in a department that has an employee that they find a little frustrating because they feel like that employee challenges them all the time, and you've got to look at this, but a lot of times what I find is that employee, the person that challenges them, it's because they want to learn. It's like, well, what is the logic behind this? Why are we doing this? Why is this safe and something else isn't safe? That person, and again, line managers, I find younger managers find those individuals very challenging to lead. But I also have found that they are very successful in a safety committee, because again, it's a different environment. It doesn't need to be so hierarchical. So they can ask those questions and then be part of the team that has to find the answers to those questions. Sometimes you'll find these people perceived as disruptive or troublemakers, because now you're going to give them some responsibility. They're going to ask that question. They're going to challenge that policy of, okay, well, we're going to look at that, but we're going to work on it together, and we're going to work out what the answer is. And that one can channel that. They tend to be, again, a little bit once you can harness that, they be quite high performing, potentially, again, supervisor candidates, and they can be the last people that those managers would suggest.
And they're vocal, so they're already
Right.
comfortable, and they are able to influence some of their coworkers, and sometimes it's the hard to move coworkers that they have the most influence over. So I agree with you. I think sometimes they do make the best safety committee members if you can get their buy-in to own that role. And usually they're excited to be a part of that because they feel heard.
Yeah.
They're heard. I agree with you. I think the more experience you get as a manager, the more skillful you get at handling those associates that challenge you. But when you're a new manager in that role, then sometimes, yeah, they are a challenge. Sending them off to safety committee can be a benefit.
And obviously, this facilitator's got to be prepared for this. So this is
Absolutely.
why it's important that facilitator has that, okay, I'm not a safety person, or, they're comfortable going, hey, in the structure, we're going to have, look, we're going to have questions. We have identified resources that we will go to, and then table those questions and then bring them back to the next safety committee with the answers from our additional
Right.
resources.
And I think that's important. That's circling back of the communication to make sure that we are bringing it back and not just tabling it and letting it get lost is also key. So let's keep moving here. We need to make sure that, again, we're looking back at those state regulations to make sure that if you have to do elections, you have to have alternates, if there's structure put in by the state, that your safety committee is meeting all of those requirements
And your ratios,
and your
because different
ratio.
states have different ratios of hourly employees to leadership employees. And some states will accept supervisors as hourly, and some states will not.
Again, really important to understand what your state regs are. Okay, so let's talk about how you can structure your safety committee, and then we'll talk about communication. Do you put in term limits? Do you find a way to rotate? Like, I typically tend to recommend that you don't change over the whole safety committee at one time because you want to have a little bit of legacy information. So I tend to recommend that, you have a core, and then if you're going to change them, say every 2 years, that you do half and then half, just so that people get some experience. But I also don't agree that somebody should be on the safety committee for 10 or 15 years, because more employees that you can pull through your safety committee, the more knowledge you put back out on your floor.
I'm in two minds about this one a little bit, and just again, it goes back to the experience. I've had both. What you definitely don't want to see is a new face from the same department every meeting. You want a little bit of, as Anna said, continuity. Although I must admit, I can think of a particular case of a great safety committee member. She was one of the longest tenured associates in this company, in the entire company. And she was a real asset to have. So you may want give yourself some wiggle room to make some exceptions to the rule. But at the same time, if we're using the safety committee, it partly is a way of developing people. Obviously, we need to cycle people through this process. And we may be developing them to the point that, okay, they get promoted out. They're no longer eligible because they become a supervisor. The other thing is, in some states, you have, required elections. It's out of your hands.
When managers and leaders are doing annual reviews and having conversations about, as an employee, where do you want to go, what are your goals, that type of thing, there are developmental opportunities within the safety committee for both lateral movements to move into different areas. So I had a number of safety committee members that wanted to get into the training learning and development. I wish we had Stephanie on the call to talk about that. Just having that small training ability and kind of learning those skills out on the floor and making those connections really helped develop them into them becoming a trainer within learning and development. So there is lots of opportunity for development, both upward and lateral. It is important to look at that when you're looking at your staff and where people want to go. I think there are good opportunities there. You need to kind of sit down and think about what skill sets you want people to have and whether they're stretch goals or they already have those skills. So you absolutely have to have some good communicators on your safety committee. You also need to have some people that have some leadership skills and have employee credibility. To your point, the lady you were talking about that had a lot of respect among the employees, that can make a really good facilitator too, because you're often rolling out policy changes or changes in a process, and you need to get employee buy-in. So having employees that have that skill or already have good credibility with the employees are also important. And what kind of perks are you going to offer? Some companies offer a pay bump for being on the safety committee. Others offer different perks, shirts, badges, special events for the safety committee. You can do what fits your organizational structure and culture. But I think you do have to sit down and think about it. when you're planning your safety committee so that it's not an afterthought. And then how are
And I,
you going to evaluate your committee? And this was always my favorite one. You got to set goals, you got to show outcomes, because that leads us into our communication topic.
Actually, let me just back up a couple of things because you just triggered a couple of thoughts. And one, which is excellent, you mentioned about shirts and vests and identifying items, and I think this also ties into your member criteria. Unfortunately, you are going to have to consider disciplinary issues because obviously you're going to have to be cautious about anyone that has a perception that they have a history of unsafe behavior. I'm not ruling it out, and it may be part of a corrective plan to get someone on board with changing that behavior, that they become part of the safety committee. But they've got to, at that point, then the unsafe behavior has got to stop. You cannot be wearing the vest that says safety on the back of it, or the t-shirt that says safety, and be seen doing something stupid in this day and age of everybody having a camera, because that's going to just kill your committee.
That becomes easier because they're a part of developing and changing the policy. Let's talk a bit about communication. I think you have to have a plan. We've alluded to that, but let's talk about the types and cadence of communication that you found successful in the past.
So obviously you've got various audiences. You have the audience that is the safety committee itself. You have the audience that is your general workforce. You have your audience that is your manager group, mid-level, and your leadership group. And obviously the information that these groups are all going to want is going to be slightly different, but you're going to want, there's going to be a lot of crossover. For example, if you have a safety topic calendar with safety topics for the month, that audience is going to be everybody in your facility, everybody in your organization. One of the things I leveraged the safety committee minutes as also a newsletter, because we would have on that, I realized, well, we've got incidents that happen. And when you put them onto a newsletter, obviously you're going to depersonalize them. So we're not going to, name names or anything, an employee in this area, this happened, because the emphasis shouldn't be on the individual. It should be on fixing the circumstances that allowed that individual to be injured. And that actually feeds into, that's how you should be approaching it in your safety committee as well. But so you de-identify information for use on your newsletter. You're going to have your safety performance metrics, your hours worked, your injury, your downtime due to incidents, those type of metrics, because that very much, I'm surprised how eye-opening that is to your line workers, because obviously that's all your senior leadership want. They want the data. Almost always they want the data. That's what they're looking at. Often comes as a surprise to the employees on the floor actually doing the work. They don't know what those numbers are. So, and I found they're very interested because that's the metrics they're being measured on, but no one talks to them about it. So you put that on there, put your safety topic for the month on there. You can then leverage that for your safety committee members, obviously, as they're getting started, getting used to communicating with their teams, because hopefully what your manager is going to do is once a month or so, every so often in a startup meeting, is have the safety committee member talk. Then they've got something to talk to. Then they've got something in their hand that they can go through and talk to the group. And then they can also take that document and post it. So we use the safety committee minutes as a newsletter, as a post-it, as a talking point.
Your comment about cadence is important, that your communication is clear, it's easy to understand, and it's crisp. I mean, that's what leadership's looking for. They're looking for something that they can scan and see easily, the information that they're looking for. But again, you want it to be a usable document that gets some play in meetings, and isn't just like hung on a bulletin board somewhere and nobody ever looks at it. And I think you have to over communicate. So, in addition to that, you need to be talking in meetings about what's going on in the safety committee, and you need to have your stakeholders educated so that they're talking in their meetings. And then, one of the things that I did a lot was give sound bites to my leadership team, because leaders are busy. They get tons of emails to read, tons of reports to read. But when you have that opportunity to say, hey, the topic of the month is this, we're doing a great job, we've decreased our injuries by 10%. That's that soundbite that a leader then can go into an all hands meeting, and they're like, oh, wow, my VP knows what's going on. Or, hey, he knows that the safety committee is hosting this big training this month. But I think making sure that they have those bullet points that they can refer to as well helps keep safety on the agenda. And that's your goal. You need safety top of mind. Let's talk a little bit about the meetings. We're getting close to wrapping up here, and we've alluded to this a little bit, making sure that you have a schedule for the meeting, making sure that people know and they're showing up at the right times, following up, making sure if you put something in the parking lot, move it to get some more information, that you're coming back to it, and that even if you haven't solved it, and I think this is really important, that you're still touching base with it. Parts are being ordered and they get delayed. You need to make sure you're talking about that so that things don't get lost and people understand where things are in the follow-up process. I think that's critical.
People are very tolerant. They understand supply chain issues. They understand workloads. They get it. As long as you haven't forgotten about it, they'll give you a lot of latitude. As long as it's still on someone's list and they're working their way towards it, they really will give you a lot of latitude.
And I think, communication is the key with that, making sure they understand where you are with it, because that's what keeps people bringing stuff to you, is that they kind of know what's going on with it and they feel heard. And I think that's important for engagement across the board.
Oh, absolutely. One other quick thing on that about scheduling, and this is a lesson I learned from Building VP. He actually said to me, because I was moving we were in a manager's meeting, it was really busy, and I was, trying to support the operation and saying, okay, well, we can move the safety committee meeting. And afterwards, the VP said, don't do that. Have your safety committee set time, set date. Everybody knows when it is. Everybody's expecting it. It's not a surprise to anyone. But when you start to move it around to accommodate operational needs, there's always going to be an operational need. You run the risk of not having the meeting because there's always an operational there's always an emergency.
I usually tell our clients on that same note is to look at the operational schedule for the year. Try to plan your meeting in a non-typically busy week. So and not all businesses have this, but if week 3 is always busy every month, that's not the week you plan your safety committee. The other thing I always recommend is don't do it the last week of the month, because just things happen. People get sick, your facilitator's out, something happens, and then you've missed your meeting. So again, I tell people to look at that operational schedule, try to find that set time that's not going to get a lot of pressure throughout the year, so you're not constantly battling operations, because your safety committee every month is in their busiest week of the month. Also making sure, to your point, that it's kind of set in stone and it's not just crammed in at the end of the month, because it is just too easy for that to go south. Okay, so we're at the end of our time. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us, follow us on all of our social media. Our website's here. You can reach out to us that way as well. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram. And if we can help you, reach out. We would love to interact with you. Thanks, Alistair. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you.